Okay, good evening. Welcome to the GreenUp Media Box. My name is Anika Behrndt, and on behalf of GreenUp, I am very thrilled to be interviewing you today. Thank you for coming to the Climate Hub in Davis, which is a site that aims to bring together different practitioners from different industries to really come up with innovative climate solutions. Thank you, Julia Langenegger and Salam Kubega, for joining us today on behalf of Climate Mondial and the Stockholm Environment Institute. Would you kindly introduce yourselves and briefly the organizations that you work with?
My name is Salam Kubega. I am a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. And the Stockholm Environment Institute is a research institute that focuses on producing society relevant research, but also translating that knowledge into policy and practices. So practical utilization of the knowledge. So we convene different stakeholders and have different interactions with different groups in order to see how best the knowledge can be utilized.
And I'm Julia. It's great to be here. Thank you for having us. I work at Climate Mondial. We're an impact investment advisory firm based out of Zurich, and I'm a senior associate there leading some work on our investment strategies.
Thank you so much for your introduction. You've participated in a panel at Climate Mondial on how data can be used to kind of improve sustainable agriculture, but also nature positive outcomes. And this is also kind of a key theme to Climate Mondial's work. Now, the Stockholm Environment Institute has been collaborating with Climate Mondial to make the data more accessible. What kind of a project have you been working on, and how does this look like in practice?
Well, we've been working on a project together going back maybe 1.5, 2 years now. We approached by Climate Mondial, they sent out a call, and we basically agreed to help them develop some practical frameworks that can help them in their investment decision making. And so we tried to develop what will be a science-based framework, including multiple decision points and using multiple data sets to help guide Climate Mondial to the point where they have what could be a full 360 view of the nature, if the effect of their investments or the likely effect of their investments on nature. So we have developed together mainly 4 different frameworks focusing on biodiversity, focusing on adaptation and resilience, focusing on watershed health, and also focusing on climate benefits. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Julia?
Well, maybe for context, a little bit more on what we do and why this was so relevant to our work is because we essentially invest in agricultural value chains, and we want to have or ensure that whatever we invest in makes sense locally and that we can have a positive impact on nature. And somehow we needed a framework, a decision tool to guide our analysis and then also our investment decisions and then our monitoring work. And that's where SCI with various different researchers really added a ton of value for us to think through all those processes.
Thank you. And I think just to clarify for everyone that's listening today, what are nature positive investments or nature positive outcomes?
So if you think back 200 to 300 years ago, when we were trying to get to this point of economic development, most of the narratives around it was how to basically, or most of the interventions focus on how to subdue nature in order to gain economic development. So we've really been doing things the wrong way: deforestation, polluting rivers, and doing so many things that have not been good for nature. So basically, nature positive investments are those investments that are done to align with nature, to follow the natural processes of nature, so that they are not inimical or have negative effects on nature, but that they actually support the course of nature. And so anything that is done in a manner that aligns with nature, for example, agroforestry practices, zero tillage practices, use of agricultural biologicals instead of synthetic pesticide. So those are things that you call nature-based solutions. But in order to have nature-positive interventions, it would mean that the combined effect of these nature-based solutions have a net positive effect on nature. So it brings a sort of improvement to the ecosystems where the interventions are being made.
Perfect. Thank you so much for explaining this. In spite of kind of them being so important for climate change, but also biodiversity and many other reasons, there's only such a small part of around 3% of overall climate finance going into the space. How can this be kind of unlocked and more finance delegated into this section?
Sure. So for the past around 15 years, we've been mobilizing capital for the sustainable use of natural resources. And what that means is that what we have done is work with corporates and institutions to really understand locally what is needed and set up financial mechanisms that help crowd funding into those solutions. And we've also invested directly into nature positive type of actions linked to agriculture. And as I mentioned before, it's very context specific what is needed, meaning the stakeholders present, the business cases that you're supporting. It really depends on the region, what is needed, the value chain, and so on. So it's difficult to apply just a cookie cutter approach. What we're seeing though now is that corporates are recognizing that their supply chains are, or rather that they need to build resilient supply chains and invest in their supply chains. Cocoa is a great example of that, what's happened with the cocoa prices, for example, and the supply. And that can also unlock opportunities for investors to come in. And that's kind of where we've been operating in that space.
Great, thank you. So kind of coming back to the tool that we briefly mentioned before in the beginning, you've really developed a framework that can turn a lot of this data into kind of more actionable outcomes. How do you do this? How do you work with data and make it more readable and understandable?
So this goes back to when we were thinking through our new investment strategy in agriculture and thinking, how can we ensure that we assess risks adequately, that we identify what is actually needed and sense check whether what we would finance makes sense locally. And then once we understand that that makes sense, how do we actually monitor that? Kind of from a theoretical point of view, we knew that the actions we would finance, that they are linked to nature, but we needed that scientific foundation to help us in that decision-making process and execution. And that's where SCI came in, and we were able to work with biodiversity experts, watershed health experts, climate adaptation and resilience experts, and on mitigation to really help think through what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and how do we monitor that throughout. And this is where this decision framework came in that kind of helps us analyze data that's readily available and integrate that into our decision-making process in a practical and efficient way.
Thanks. Maybe I can add a little bit. I mean, it's easy to think that when you make an investment, maybe just by looking at it, there's a sense of intuition that this should have a positive effect on nature. And so that's why we have so many interventions going around, planting trees and doing all kinds of things. Of course, trees are important, but working with nature is a delicate balancing act. You need to know and understand the different components of nature and how one intervention that you make in one place could have multiple effects elsewhere. So with the work that we're doing together with Clamondial, we try as much as possible to understand some of these synergies and some of the trade-offs that can occur as a result of making one intervention within a landscape and what the cascading effect could be within a landscape. Yeah.
Could you kind of give an example of maybe one, project for how this framework is applied or where, maybe in a region or something kind of that we can grasp what it would look like?
We have tried to apply or try to analyze parts of this framework in an area that hopefully Clamondial would be looking at, but in parts of Kenya where there is a water tower, there are conservation areas, there are forests, the climate is changing, there's a monoculture cropping system going on there. a mix of multiple interactions happening there really. And we're seeing biodiversity loss also happening within that region. So if you're an investor, you want to make positive effects on nature, really the question is, how will you be able to do this where there's a mix of multiple different things happening that might even be clashing with each other? So what we try to do in this instance is to guide Clamondia through each of these different components of nature, try to help them see, well, this is probably where your sourcing region should end, because by the time you go beyond this boundary, you're probably getting into a certain buffer zone that might affect biodiversity, and we really don't want you to do that if you want to have a positive effect on nature. Or maybe make sure that you do not get your cropping or your sourcing zone too close to this water tower, because there might be a negative effect and so on. So we have, I would say, maybe close to 40 or 50 decision nodes where we basically say, here's what you should think about, here's what the data says about this particular point, and here's the decision you can make at this point. However, if the decision node is showing that it's basically in the yellow or red zone, because we have green, red, and yellow, basically. Green means, okay, it's good. You've taken everything into consideration. You can go to the next step out of the 50. When it's yellow, we're saying stop and think. You might need to collect more data. You might need to understand this landscape a little better. You might need to design new interventions. And red means, please don't go there. You shouldn't be doing any kind of investment that is close to these areas. So as much as possible, we try to delineate the landscape and help them get to a point where they can make an investment that will likely not have negative effects on nature. But nature is a very complex thing. So we don't claim that we'll be able to know the total effect at the end of the day in terms of the positive effect, but we need to be able to know that we have done our due diligence in a manner that as much as possible, all the data that we have utilized and everything that we have done could lead to a positive effect.
Well, it's a very comprehensive framework, and you probably do a wonderful job of capturing so much more of the risks, which are usually not involved, captured in typical frameworks. I'm curious to hear kind of more on the investors' side of this. Julia, when these additional natural dimensions become visible, even if they're kind of not captured like carbon is, how does that change the way that investors make decisions?
So you highlighted risks, and it's also about understanding the risks, understanding how to address those risks. If you don't know them, you can't address them. And so that's one thing. And we, as a second step, though, look at ecosystem potential. So what can you actually invest in? Does it make sense locally? And I think that sense check is really interesting for investors as well, to make sure that whatever you're financing, not just from a business perspective, makes sense and kind of is integrated within a business case, but that you also have, co-benefits, because it, as we see with agroforestry or other types of kind of interventions, it's reinforcing. Yeah. Nature can reinforce an agricultural supply chain as well and build resilience. And I think that's where it becomes very interesting.
Exactly. Maybe I can I can add to that. So, I mean, of course, you'll be able to see perhaps that you make an intervention, say you're thinking agroforestry, make an intervention and you see, okay, maybe pollination services increase. You'll be able to follow some of these singular co-benefits, but nature is a lot more complex than that. There are several bundled effects, we call them, that, occur as a result of the interaction between multiple ecosystem services within, maybe a production system. So all you can do mostly would be to make the right kind of investment, the right kind of interventions that will likely lead to a positive effect and allow nature itself to have these bundled effects and all these positive interactions that might occur. Maybe I could give you a little bit of an example. For example, if you do a diverse cropping system in an agroforestry system, it might lead to the habitat being more diverse. When the habitat is diverse, it will support pollination and natural enemies, biocontrol. Natural enemies will then regulate pests, reducing synthetic chemical use. Lower synthetic chemical use means that the soil is protected. Lower pressure on soil life means that there's more nutrient cycling. More nutrient cycling also means that there's higher plant growth and carbon sequestration. There's a lot of multiple effects that one intervention could lead to. So we try to help Clamondia get to the point of making the right intervention, and then we allow nature to do its job of regeneration.
Great. Thank you. That's super interesting to hear how many co-benefits there actually are to nature positive investments. How is this framework currently being used? Is it used company internally? Is it going externally?
That's a good question. So it was purpose-built for us. So for this strategy, we knew we needed this kind of scientific foundation to help guide our decision-making, due diligence, and monitoring activities when investing. But really quickly, together with SEI, we identified that this can be scaled and that the usability extends far beyond just us. And so this is now, we're kicking off the second phase where we're now digitalizing it and looking at how we can make this more accessible. Also, we are now even pursuing a non-for-profit type of structure to house this, just to ensure that it is generating a public good for others as well. So this is in the next phase, and we'll be working on this in the coming year.
I mean, Clamondial is a partner that every research institution would like to work with. They've got the right values, I would say, and of course they are in the private sector space. They need to keep their business going, but when we have asked or when we've had conversations with them, they've been very open to making part of the data that we're developing together with them, which they are paying for, by the way, available so that others may be able to use it, because they're very, very interested in advancing the cause of nature. And that's the kind of, we are really humbled, at least at the Stockholm Environment Institute, by this open-mindedness that Clamondia has to this, and trying to open up the space so that others will be able to benefit from, the work that they are actually doing.
That's amazing that you kind of open up this framework for the public good as well. By kind of sharing the data and sharing frameworks, everyone can definitely benefit from improving their decision making as well. Yeah. What would you say needs to happen, or in order for it to become publicly available or usable by others? Does the data need to be kind of more collected? Does the framework need to be formalized somehow?
So from our side, why we needed this was as well to navigate all the data that is out there is difficult. We were working with 3 biodiversity experts on this and watershed health experts from SEI to navigate all these amazing tools. Satellite imagery is difficult for an institution to have all that expertise in-house. And so what this does is essentially make use of the data, not just in silos, but helps to create connections between all these data points and make sense out of it. And so, yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, so that it makes sense, mainly, I would say. There are already several data sets out there. What's happening is that different people are using different data sets and working on one aspect of nature. The unique innovation that we're trying to bring to this space really is to bring the data, hopefully, in one place as much as possible. Of course, we're not being able to bring every data set, but we want to have a set of data sets that actually allow you to have a full, as much as possible, a full view of nature, so to speak. And we use data generally in 2 ways. We have data sets that are integrated into the tool itself. Basically, that tells you that, okay, this decision you can go ahead and make, go ahead with the investment or not. For example, we have a data set on country commodity risk. We try to showcase that, okay, in this country, this commodity is a high risk commodity, and for that matter, you need to be careful in this way, and that you should design interventions differently if you're going to invest in that commodity. But we also have a ton of data that actually only informs you on what decision you have to make at a certain point within the framework. So it's not maybe integrated, but it is spatial data that shows you where all the water towers are, where, the biodiversity hotspots are, and tries to get to the point of making a decision that actually does not go into those areas.
Great, thank you. So you've mentioned how there is already a lot of data out there, and that it needs to be kind of made usable. Mm-hmm. What kind of decisions can companies and investors already make today with the available data that exists?
I mean, there's a lot of decisions you can make. The data is readily available. It's periodically updated. You could easily go to the IUCN database and see within your landscape which species exist, which species are being threatened, which species could go extinct in the next couple of years and so on. So the data is readily available. And if you have that data and that knowledge, for example, you'll be able to design your intervention so that it does not affect those species within the landscape. So the real thing is to make the data inform you or make it usable for the decision that you're going to make. And that's where actors like SEI, for example, come in, where we try to help you make sense of the data. What does this really, really mean for you in terms of the investment that you're going to make in that landscape? Is it really, really good for you to plant that eucalyptus tree? We don't know. It might be good because the water towers are good over there, but it might also be very bad as well. So we try to help you with designing the interventions and making the right kind of decision that is relevant for that particular landscape as well. So there are two levels you can look at this. Number one, you can allow the data at the national level lead you to make a decision, and it might be wrong. On the other hand, we can help you make what will be subnational analysis of the landscape, for example. And that will allow you to make, useful investments within the landscape that is not based on some generic understanding of the data at the national level. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Has there been any part, there must have been, something which has changed about the framework throughout? Something which maybe you expected to have included but have left out in the end because it turned out to be unnecessary?
Unnecessary?
Or maybe unnecessary, but maybe not.
A lot.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. We are researchers. We're very focused on the detail.
Yeah.
It must be done well. It must be done the scientific way. It must be the most robust indicator and the best way to do it as much as possible. That's a challenge that perhaps we have. We're very detail oriented, and now we're working with a partner like Clermont, which says that, well, you need to make this practically usable for us. In a sense, we can't just go and spend millions and millions of dollars on biodiversity and setting up camera traps or acoustic sampling systems or eDNA sampling systems. No business really would be able to do that. It's too expensive to set that up. So we've had to take a step backwards all the time to see which kinds of metrics or which kinds of decision nodes can we include that are good enough, that are indicative of a certain positive change towards the direction that the investment wants to go, so that it aligns with their business processes and they can still be profitable while doing it. However, we have check-in points at certain points where we want to make certain claims and attributions, then we can bring the full rigor of the science to those points.
There's a way to go. I think, it's a great foundation that we have. It is practical and it has met all our criteria. As we mentioned, we want to scale this and digitalize it, make it more efficient. And there are some really exciting steps ahead. So this is in the works and we're excited to continue this work. So.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Maybe on a more personal note, what has been both of your favorite kind of parts of working on this project? Maybe I've also learned a memory or something which you really fondly remember.
No, I've just felt so privileged working with a global team based in Latin America and Sweden and the US, and having such breadth and depth of expertise on this and working together. In every question I was, sent to someone who really, the explanations were so detailed and we got into the weeds with so much. And in the end, we still got something that's understandable and usable. And so it's just been a privilege to work with these scientists on something like this.
Well, Clamondia might not know this, but they're really helping us scratch an itch that we've had for a very, very long time. No researcher is 100% happy to do all the work, go to the field, do all the data collection, do the publication. It's a really, really rigorous process. And then it ends up in a shelf or, some journal somewhere that nobody ever reads. Or if you're lucky, you get 5 citations or whatever. Really, most researchers want to get to a point where the science that they develop can make the world a better place. That's really what is at the heart of every researcher and every research institution. In fact, this is the mandate that we've been given by the public. And I mean, when you pay your taxes and we receive it as researchers, the idea is that we do something in terms of develop research that can come back to you at the end of the day. So that loop has been difficult for us to close just because of several challenges. We've not been able to get the evidence back in the society in the manner that it should be. So Clamondia coming to us and saying that, hey, can you start thinking a little bit more about this evidence that you've developed and making it practical so that we can deploy it? It was like, wow, of course, we want to do this. We want to see where this goes. We want to make sure that the evidence that we're developing, Stockholm Environment Institute has been there for close to 40 years, developed a lot of evidence, a lot of knowledge that exists. If we have partners who are ready to help us deploy that knowledge on the ground in a manner that benefits society and benefits nature, that's the ultimate that we're looking for.
Amazing. That's great that the two organizations work so well together, and it also shows how beneficial it can be for science and finance to work more closely together. Kind of bringing the conversation back to Davos and to the Climate Hub, where we really strive to make impactful partnerships. What would you say is one partnership that you would really like to walk out of the Climate Hub with? It doesn't have to be instantaneous, but some sort of a change that you would really like to see over the next year.
A change we'd like to see in the next, based on what we've seen here.
Yeah, and the way partnerships are made, for example.
Yeah. Listen, now being in Davos, I realized that there's so much need in what would be the private sector and with funders, and that we have not thought about really as researchers. There's several good actors out there. They are well-meaning actors. They really want to do something about the challenge. I mean, I went to a session that was talking about droughts in the UAE, and they're trying to see how they can collaborate to develop, solutions for drought and so on. And we have some of this knowledge already. For instance, we know and understand the hydrological cycles, how it works, think about evapotranspiration and how we have something called flying rivers, basically, where evapotranspiration happens in one area, but it leads to rainfall in another area, and all that. We know and understand these dynamics and how it works. We know how the hydrological cycle is going to change, and because of modeling based on certain interventions that would be done. So it's nice to see here what the needs actually of these different actors are. We've not been speaking to each other really. Maybe we're not understanding what their needs are. So now we know and hear, oh, UAE, okay, you have this water problem. You're really, really trying to fix it. Maybe we can help design interventions that can help you fix it. Or you have this biodiversity problem that you're trying to fix it. We have the knowledge. Maybe we can come together and do something together as well. So it's been an interesting forum to understand a group of, stakeholders that we should be in deep conversations with, at least as researchers, that we've not really had that kind of conversation with, just because really it seems that our interests are diverting or are divergent. We're very much so-called for the public good, and then there's other actors that might be on the, get profit, do something quickly, be in a rush. And we don't want to be, rush in that sense, because we want things to be robust. So I think those narratives that at least I had, which might be negative, have been, I've totally done away with them right now. I see how these actors are really, really happy to work with different stakeholders. They've got their arms wide open. I've had several dialogues with several of them, and we're going to start getting on developing useful frameworks that can solve real problems in society. Rather than just leaving it on the shelf or going to some scientific conference and talking to other researchers or scientists just to look cool, which is not very useful. So yeah, the science to society translation needs to happen. And for us to be able to do that, we need to talk to the people who need the data and evidence and are happy to start processes of implementing them. And so we're happy to collaborate with all these stakeholders. Sorry.
No, it was so good. I'll just keep it short. And I think it's my third WEF now. And coming out of this one, I really feel like it's more about action and examples and really showing that it works, rather than talking about the barriers. And that's a really nice shift in what I've been hearing, and very motivating to see really exciting ideas come to life and actually work on the ground. So that's been motivating for me. We're always open to partnerships. The one with SCI, we're looking to scale. So anyone interested in the tool, please do reach out.
Yeah, and stakeholders are willing to also take a chance. That's how I see it. They're not, of course, you might think that you've developed something, it's not 100% yet. But a lot of these stakeholders are, let's do something together. Let's take a chance. Let's see where we get to. And that's inspiring. Yeah.
Amazing. I hope that you walk out of the Climate Hub and World Economic Forum in Davos with new partnerships that you can scale these solutions and this framework as well. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure, very insightful, and looking forward to reading more about your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.